What's up everyone? Welcome to this new episode of Song Quirks, and the quirky song we're going to tackle today is called Freak Show Excess by Steve Vai. This is one of the most interesting and representative songs for Steve Vai's music. It marks the kind of pinnacle of the folk influence in Steve Vai's music. Before going into the specifics of Freak Show Excess, last week I mentioned that Bela Bartok had some interesting ideas when it comes to folk music and especially the modes, and I want to explore that a bit more. Bartok viewed chromaticism in a modal context in three different ways. It was polymodality, it was melodic chromaticism, and modal melodic chromaticism. Polymodality, the juxtaposition of two different modes playing at the same time, isn't necessarily something you see often in popular music and even in avant-garde popular music like the kind Steve Vai makes, so this one's a bit less relevant. The other two, on the other hand, are quite relevant to Steve Vai's music and to Freak Show Excess specifically. Modal chromaticism, the second category that Bartok sometimes referred to as polymodal chromaticism, involves diatonic notes combined with chromatic notes, and you get these interesting modes where you have an aeolian, say, sometimes with a raised fourth, sometimes just as an aeolian. And finally, modal melodic chromaticism involves having one center note and then everything else can be chromaticized at will. It's somewhat similar to pitch axis, but it doesn't rely that much on chords like we saw in the Satriani video. And it's also a bit different just because in Bartok's view, most of this stuff was happening on monodies, on melodies, on one note at a time melodies. So when it comes to Vai's music, it's rare to just have either some sort of drone or even just a completely solo section. There's always something happening in the background that requires some chords. So if you think about it, it's kind of a combination between modal chromaticism, polymodal chromaticism, and modal melodic chromaticism, but all of these, instead of being monodies, they're actually harmonies because they have more than one note playing at any given time because of the fact that you do have the rhythm section playing stuff. Vai acknowledges the influence of folk music and the fact that, to quote him, "I stay pretty diatonic and then my fingers just start going kind of bizarro." And he also argues that he uses modes more like colors in tapestries and just a way to color the sound. Each mode kind of gives you a different response, especially with these more exotic, Eastern sounding modes. You do get a completely different sound to the Western kind of music that we're used to listening to. Vai claims that a huge influence for him when writing Freak Show Excess was an artist, a Bulgarian artist called Ivo Popasov. And the thing is, the music that he usually plays isn't necessarily Bulgarian, even though it is kind of articulated by Bulgarians as being uniquely Bulgarian. But it's kind of a fusion of stuff that's been going on for the past like 50 years in the Balkan area. And the music that comes out of this sounds extremely similar regardless of what country you actually refer to. So this is a section of Ivo Popasov. This is another piece of Bulgarian music. It's a traditional folk song. This one's from Hungary. This one's from Romania. Even though Vai claims to have been influenced by Ivo Popasov, it's not the only influence, in the sense that Ivo Popasov himself has taken on a lot of other musics to make his style, and as you saw, everything in that region tends to kind of meld in a sort of hybrid genre that Popasov plays. In general, this music is in odd meters. You have 17/16, you have 11/16, you have 7/8. It's also highly melismatic. You get all of these different ornaments to color the music in a way that's not necessarily common in Western music, and it's also always modal. You always have some sort of interesting thing happening in terms of the melodies, and it's rarely in the diatonic modes of the Western mode system, and this makes this music extremely well suited for someone like Steve Vai, who likes to explore a lot of chromaticism. The theme that starts off this 7-minute fiasco, as Steve Vai dubs it, is in Mixolydian and A Mixolydian, but we also get the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 6th as mobile degrees, because they're not always in the original state of the Mixolydian. And this is something we should expect given the framework of the modal chromaticism that we talked about. And it's also full of these interesting slides and bends and things that are un-guitaristic, as Steve Vai dubs it. And they make these sections sound not only closer to that Ivo Popasov influence, but also quite unique to Steve Vai's playing. This next section has that 7/16 feel that I was talking about, the odd meters that are so present in folk music. And it's quite interesting that the key changes, the tonal center changes. We're not on A anymore, we're now on D. We also get this theme in D Aeolian, and the fact that it's in D Aeolian isn't necessarily the selling point, but the glissandos between the notes is. Have a listen to this. Then this theme, again, plays around with the idea of modal melodic chromaticism. Sometimes it's Aeolian, sometimes it's the chromatic 1 mode, and it's quite interesting to see how he plays with that transition. You also get this fascinating section here where you basically have a Lydian, but with a lowered 6th degree, and this is quite unusual, and it's not necessarily a mode you find on its own, but it's something that you do to the Lydian mode, again, chromaticism, to make it sound interesting, and in this case closer to that Ivo Popasov influence. And there's also some sequential development as well, and it makes the whole section Eastern influence, but at the same time kind of still maintain that Western philosophy of developing stuff. Even though this fusion is a peculiar view on folk music, kind of full of stereotypes that foreigners, in this case Vai, interpret as being authentic to a specific country, in this case Bulgaria, it is quite an interesting feat to see how these influences get translated into essentially a rock context. Even though we're not talking about a specific country's folk music, the influence of the Balkan area and that type of traditional music and Steve Vai's playing is tremendous. It's not only something he uses on Freak Show Excess. You'd need to only think about Live in an Ultra World, which had songs made for each country he visited during that tour. And in general, especially in terms of phrasing, there's a lot that he took from this type of music that stuck with him. I hope you enjoyed the video, at least as much as I did making it. I love Steve Vai's music, and I also have an appreciation for Eastern European folk music. Let me know what you thought about the video in the comments below, and what other songs or artists, bands you want me to cover on this series. And in the meantime, Freak Show Access.